So, this guy goes to prison. He notices that every now and then, one of the prisoners will just yell out a number. And everyone else in the prison will just start to laugh. They'll say 74, and everyone will just start laughing. Well, he asked his cellmate about this. He said, what's the deal with the numbers? His cellmate said, well, the thing is, we only have one joke book in here, and everybody's memorized it. So if you want to tell a joke, all you do now is just say the number. Well, the new guy got a hold of the book, and he went through and he memorized it. And joke number 87 was one that was particularly funny to him. So one night he called out, 87. Nobody laughed. Complete silence. Looked at his cellmate kind of confused, and his cellmate said, some people just can't tell a joke. Sometimes with stories in Scripture, we go into shorthand. We'll mention a story by a title or a phrase, and we'll just sort of get it without telling the whole story. And so when we retell the story of Jesus and Peter and the boat, we know the basic outline. But this is one of those stories that really does have layer upon layer upon layer of things to think about and meaning, and so that's why we're going to continue to revisit it as we go through this book study together. Usually when we think of this story, we think of the 5 major players: Jesus, Peter, the boat, the water, and the storm. In our shorthand memory, though, we frequently will overlook 11 other very important players here. The other guys in the boat who never once stepped over the rail. As the storm raged on and Peter was exploring the possibility of walking on the water, there were 11 disciples who were not leaving the boat. Why? Why didn't they have Peter's same curiosity about Jesus? Why didn't they have that same request that Peter did? Jesus, command me to come out there for you then. And more importantly, as we read and as we share the story, why do we overlook them so easily? Well, I think it's because it's the same reason that the velociraptors in Jurassic Park didn't eat the kids in the lab. If you remember the movie, the kids didn't move, and the dinosaurs walked past them. They weren't moving. We don't notice things that aren't moving. The disciples in the boat weren't moving, and we didn't notice them. When I was serving in Chicago, I took some kids from my youth group to a high ropes course. It was a very safe one, a very reputable one, very well-known one. And for one of the kids in the group, her name was Susan, it was also a very scary one. Now, I've known people who are afraid of heights. I'm one of them. But I had never seen someone with such an intense fear of heights, a paralyzing fear of heights, as Susan did. She did fine in the morning when we were doing kind of the low ropes things, and while we were doing our team building activities, she was fine. But I knew that she was already nervous about the afternoon. So after lunch, we headed to the high ropes portion. To her credit, Susan climbed the 20-foot ladder to the platform, and then she set herself down right in the middle of it, as far away from any edge as she could possibly be. And she stayed there for a while, for quite a long time, for most of the afternoon. And Susan and I talked the whole time about what she'd like to do and why she didn't want to move and what made her so afraid of heights and why she might not think about moving. But eventually, she decided she could move to the edge, so we did. We went over to the edge of the platform and we talked there for a little while. And it was getting towards time to go, and Susan started to climb. There was a cargo net about as wide as this opening here that went off of the platform and was attached to a very sturdy telephone pole over there. And Susan started to climb across it. And you can imagine the rest of the group was very encouraging, and they were cheering her on and they were applauding her. And she was doing really well until Susan looked down. And then she froze. Completely froze. Couldn't move. Not up, not down, not side to side, not a single muscle. She just froze. And so, we thought about that. We realized that Susan finally decided to head out from the safety of the platform, only to find that she had found herself stuck someplace else, someplace where there really was no other way to get her back. It's kind of a cruel metaphor for the journey that a lot of us take as people of faith. Sometimes our Christian walk looks like Susan on the cargo net. The promises of baptism provide us with great comfort, eternal comfort, and we like that. And that comfort helps us to venture out a little bit. We go out in faith and we start to look at things from a different perspective. We'll discover just how far we can rely on those baptismal promises. The rush of discovery, well, it can be overwhelming and exhilarating, and it thrills us. And then we'll realize that we have ventured out on a limb that has taken us a pretty far piece away from the comfort and security of the platform. And we panic. And we wonder, just as Susan was wondering, why we even bothered to wander off the platform of predictability in the first place. Why we've taken ourselves into this wilderness of uncertainty. Why did we ever move? Well, we encouraged, we cheered, we prayed for Susan, but Susan just hung there. After a while, and after several tears from Susan, I went out on the cargo net with her. I stopped right next to her, and we went back. I would say, Susan, we're going to move our right hands now, and we would. And now we're going to move our right feet, and we would. And we made it back to the platform together. But the important part here is that Susan never regretted going out on that cargo net. Never once did she look back and say, boy, that was the dumbest thing I ever did. She never regretted that adventure. And that summer, Susan went on a service trip with the group for the first time. And Susan was almost painfully introverted and exceptionally shy. But Susan met people she had never met before. She made new friends. She served in ways she never thought she would. She was a part of kids' clubs. She played with kids in ways that she never had before, and said it was truly one of the best weeks of her life. I blame the cargo net. When we have opportunities placed in front of us by God, we always have two options. One is yes, one is no. And as Joseph Campbell, the scholar, once said, the big question is whether you're going to say a hearty yes to your adventure. We live with that choice every single day. Now, if we say no, we've effectively glued ourselves to the bottom of whatever boat it is that we're in. We've opted for the comfort of the known, of the secure, of the safe. It might be a boat that's kind of rolling with the waves, but we're attached and we're not going anywhere. We have effectively taken our place with those other 11 disciples in the bottom of the boat, and I don't know that we want that. So if you choose yes, well, then there are two possible outcomes. There's failure and there's success. Certainly, sometimes we'll fail. There's always the possibility that things won't work out the way that we envision it. That can be hard. Sometimes it can be a little embarrassing. It can be a setback, to be sure. Sometimes when you take a risk, you'll fall short. When that happens, you have another unique opportunity, one that was described this past week by that great philosopher and theologian, Torrey Hunter. He said, when you fail, you accept it. You make adjustments, and you move on. This from a guy who plays a game where failure is still considered pretty good. For a baseball player to fail 7 out of 10 times, you're still a 300 hitter. Not bad. You make adjustments, you move on. I can't imagine that Peter didn't take a couple stumbles as he stepped foot out of the boat the first time. I can't imagine he didn't take some sort of itty-bitty steps, just sort of checking to see what this was going to be like. I can't imagine he didn't slip a little bit when those first waves started smacking him on the knees and shins. But Peter adjusted, and he moved on. He took a next step. He kept walking toward Jesus. There's always success, too. There's always the possibility that we might actually achieve something. There's always the possibility we might reach a goal. There's always the chance that we'll succeed in a way that we had never even imagined. When I was a freshman in college, I went to worship at the little Lutheran church across the street from campus. I didn't go to the Wittenberg Chapel. I wanted to go to a church that was more like home. Well, about the first month of my first year of college, they asked if I might be willing to lead their 8th grade Sunday school. There were only like 4 or 5 of them. What could possibly go wrong, right? But I was scared to death because I'd never done anything like that before. I never, barely went to Sunday school when I was a kid myself, so this was all new territory for me. It turns out it was kind of fun. At first, we started working our way through the book, and it was okay, but the kids didn't really care for it, and I found it kind of boring, so I started making some adjustments. We moved on. I learned to write my own lesson plans. I adapted them for those kids. We had some great Bible conversations. I found that I grew and I changed that year. And as I look back, I realized I was starting to evolve as a youth minister. After a couple months of Sunday school, I asked them, what they did as a youth group. They asked what a youth group was. So within a month or so, we had our first ever lock-in. It was one of my last ever lock-ins. The next summer, they actually drove up to my house. They grabbed a couple of adults, and they came up to my house for a weekend. And we had kind of a retreat and a planning time and did some worship stuff at my parents' house. It was great. I still had no idea what I was doing. And 25 years later, I'm still learning. But I never would have had the great adventure that I've had if I hadn't said yes when they asked. If you want to walk on the water, you've got to get out of the boat. If you want to get out of the boat, you have to move. You have to do something. It may not always be successful the first time. You may have to make adjustments and move on. But you'll never know what the water feels like unless you step over the rail. And if Jesus is the one who's calling you out there, you can trust in his promises. When we step out, we discover gifts and opportunities that we never, ever would have seen from the floor of the boat. And we don't step out and walk on the water. We don't step out toward Jesus because we've conquered our fears. We step out toward Jesus despite our fears. Because that's when the adventure really takes off. That's when we really learn and we grow. We experience that kind of life and ministry that we were made to do. And so with that said, I want to just lead into our Thanksgiving moment. There are some things we do that seem very small, but have effects far beyond what we imagine. There's a group of folks here who have been knitting prayer shawls for several years, and they make all different colors and varieties, and they're beautiful. And we take them to folks in, nursing homes, long-term care facilities. We take them to people in the hospital, and they're always met with a great deal of appreciation. Well, last week, I was on the much-maligned ELCA Clergy Facebook page, and someone posted that they were in North Carolina, and they had just given a prayer shawl to a member of their congregation who had just gone into a nursing home. And all it said was that it was made by a Trinity knitter, and it had this little poem on it. Well, I sent her a message, and I said, and she was wondering where it came from. I sent her a message and said, is there a name on it? And she sent me the name, and I said, actually, yeah, that was one of ours. I said, somehow that made it from Owatonna, Minnesota, to North Carolina. A prayer shawl that was knit right here is warming someone with the knowledge that it was made in love and with prayer, and somebody knows There are people beyond the walls of her care facility that care for her. What a great thing to have something that seems simple. Well, for those of you who knit, for me it would be next to impossible. For those of you who knit, a simple prayer shawl that's impacting people far beyond the borders of our state. Those go around the world. What a great gift. Friends, we all have those gifts, and I know that you use them. So thank you for using the gifts and abilities you have to impact not just the people in our community, but truly a global population. And thanks to God for giving us these opportunities. Our worship continues with the collection of our offering.